I'll go back. I have to explain a little bit of my life in order to say how I came to these principles, and I will give a trigger warning. There's some things in my life that it's a little bit deeper that could be triggering for someone, just like I would with my students. I like to warn of that beforehand. So my mom was 15 when she found out she was pregnant with me after she was assaulted on a blind date. I ended up getting adopted by my aunt and uncle. My family was very pro-life, a family of Republicans, and so they decided to keep me. But I was raised by my great aunt and uncle. My aunt and uncle, who I'll just refer to as mom and dad the rest of the time because it's a lot easier for me, became drug addicts during my infancy, and they were addicted to drugs for the first 8 years of my life. So throughout my life, I witnessed my parents go through job after job, and not only that, there not being a lot of support for us. There wasn't, my parents didn't know of an addiction place to quit this addiction. They didn't know a way out. They just knew that there was drugs available, and that would be what they can do. And so when I was, throughout that time, we were evicted 9 times, I believe. It was very rare when we had both utilities turn on inside of our house. There was one time from my 7th grade year through my freshman year, we didn't have running water inside of our house because we couldn't afford the bill. And so what happened throughout that time is my family also found out that I knew that I was kind of adopted. And so a lot of them made up things that they thought could be true but weren't. So when I was 6, I was told I was a failed abortion. That wasn't true. I was told that my dad was in prison. I was told that my biological dad knew about me, but he didn't want anything to do with me. I had like 9 other siblings, which at 6 years old makes no sense, but especially with how young my mom was. But when you're 6, you don't really understand that. But going into this, I kind of give that background to show how much chaos was going on in my life. And I found my identity inside of school. I became very interested in politics, specifically like presidents when I was a kid. If you can't tell by my name, my middle name is also James. So as a kid, my name was Zachery James Taylor, and my uncle is actually related to the 12th president. And so I became obsessed with trying to figure out stuff with politics. And I would just basically go to school as a safe space. My parents sobered up. We started going to a church when I was 6 years old. And both of my parents, the pastor there was a former drug addict. They waited with my parents for about a week to help them go through detox. And they've been sober now for, that would be 16 years, almost 17 years probably. But during that time, we still struggled financially. I went to school, figured I was no longer the smartest kid in the school, and became very depressed. But I was the poor kid who didn't necessarily smell the best. And there wasn't a lot of support there for me. I did have sports. I did have good teachers that would try to reach out. But a lot of times as a student inside of an urban school, there was just not a lot of funding in place to help a student like me. When I was in elementary school, there was a magnet program where I could do individual math stuff that would help me learn. But by the time I got to middle school and high school, I hit a peak where I was no longer able to go further, where students at the suburban school districts around me were able to go much further, get higher level of college courses than I was even offered at a bigger school district. And so I ended up going to a school with nearly 3,000 students in high school, and I did JROTC, and I also realized I wanted to be a teacher. So during this time, I would have JROTC with a libertarian and a Republican as my instructors, talking about politics the whole period. And then my second hour would be on comparative politics with someone who was a socialist Democrat or Democratic socialist talking about politics. And so I would hear from both sides and I would talk to both sides and I would try to come to a balance. I always found myself as a moderate and felt like there was something inside of our political system is very divided. And as an English teacher, I know we have to have debate. We have to actually talk about things and come to a compromise and agreement in order to get things done. And a lot of times that didn't happen. I was going through my years when I watched Barack Obama be elected and a full Democratic House and Senate, and a lot of things get passed without a lot of consideration of Republicans, and then vice versa going on once Trump was elected, and just a lot of debate and anger, and that frustrated me with both parties. So I accepted Christ in my life my senior year of high school. I got my life together. I went to college, got a full ride scholarship through the Goodrich program, and I now have my master's degree as well in educational leadership. And what I work at a school that's currently 38% African American students, 24% white, about 18% Latino, and 15% Asian. A lot of those Asian students are refugee students. And so what I was seeing, coming from a very pro-life stance, was a lot of people who said they were pro-life, but then neglected humanity and equal rights and systematic racism after the child was born. And I also saw a lot of my friends who were Democrats as teachers be very pro-abortion, but also neglect mothers, neglect healthcare in different ways to those mothers, especially mental health, due to those abortions. And so I saw a lot of times where people were very heavy on one way, very heavy on another, but both ways did not lead to a very humane approach. And so finally, after everything with immigration going on inside of under Trump's policies, that with DACA, the recent stuff where trying to send international students back who are legal immigrants if they do not take an in-person class during the summer. And also our Secretary of Education's stances on several things. I decided I morally could no longer vote for Trump again. And I needed to find another candidate. I needed to find someone who, a party that actually aligned with my beliefs, that not only is it important to protect a child in the womb, but it's important to also help that child throughout their life, all the way until a natural death, in order to succeed and have equal access and to be treated like a human. And that's what brought me to the ASP. Right away, I noticed the pro-life for the whole life stance. I also noticed the prison reform stances as well, which I greatly appreciated, seeing, I believe, 5 of my students go to DCYC in this past year alone, and knowing that when they came back, I was the only teacher willing to work with them to get them caught up so they did not fail. Knowing that the prison pipeline for a lot of my students currently is one that's hard for them to overcome. And coming to from a brother who is half black, and I have a brother who's half black and half white, who is on our Omaha Police Department force, has worked in the gang unit, homicide unit, and also seeing his reactions and talking to him about his job, and just knowing there needs to be more accountability. It doesn't mean to completely defund the police, but there needs to be better accountability and reform. And so that's just a little bit about how I came to the ASP. I love how it bridges that gap, how it addresses issues. And for the first time in my life, I was reading through the platform and I felt I finally found a party that actually agrees with what I stand